Hello, I'm Org, and in this video I say farewell to the Gloster Gladiator, a British Tier 1 biplane fighter. The Gladiator was the last of the British biplane fighters, and was being phased out of service when the Second World War began. It served well in the initial years of the war, although generally in secondary theatres, and particularly against the Italians. Eventually the Gladiators were all replaced by monoplane fighters, ending the role of biplane fighters in the RAF. The Gladiator was a development of the Gauntlet, which had been the main RAF fighter from 1935 to 1937. To get an idea of the pace of aircraft development in this period, the Gauntlet entered service in 1935, while its replacement, seen here, the Gladiator, entered service in 1936, and the replacements for the Gladiator, the Spitfire and Hurricane, entered service in 1937 and 1938. The Gladiator story begins when the RAF put out a call for a fighter aircraft with 4 machine guns capable of flying at 250 miles per hour to replace the Gauntlet. H.P. Folland, the designer of the Gauntlet, realised that the aircraft could be modernised such that it would meet this requirement. By fitting a more powerful version of the Mercury engine, adding 2 more machine guns, as well as reducing drag on the airframe by improvements such as an enclosed canopy, the Gladiator was barely able to meet the requirements set. However, the Gladiator was up against stiff competition, including the Bristol Type 133 and the Supermarine Type 224, both of which should be known to World of Warplanes players. The Gladiator was successful in part because most of its competitors based their design around the newer Goshawk engine, which proved unreliable compared to the older Mercury engine used by the Gladiator. The Gladiator was exported to a number of countries, and even entered service for the Axis powers in the Second World War. The Germans captured Gladiators that had formerly been part of the Latvian Air Force, while the Finns flew the Gladiators that they had purchased from the British until the end of the war in 1945. Interestingly, in the Iraqi uprising of 1941, Gladiators flew on both sides of the conflict, although the inexperienced and outnumbered Iraqi pilots did not have the same success as the RAF pilots. The Gladiators also served in East Asia under the nationalist Chinese flag, where it was generally outclassed by the A5M and soon relegated to training duties. In War Thunder, the Gladiator is a low-tier fighter, and it feels very low tier. While being clearly superior to all the reserve aircraft, it is also clearly inferior to most other low tier fighters. For example, the F-2A1, which sits at the same battle tier as the Gladiator, is 50 km an hour faster and can turn almost as tightly as the Gladiator while having comparable firepower. In practice, I find that the Gladiator has to play very cautiously. The trick is to inflict as much damage as you can while not taking risks, because a competent opponent will almost always be able to outfly you if you give them the chance. Unfortunately, I have a tendency to want to dive in and help out my teammates, which does not always end up well for me, especially in this aircraft. Once engaged in combat, the Gladiator has to rely on its manoeuvrability, although generally that will not let you down. While it can be an effective energy fighter, the low top speed makes it vulnerable to monoplane fighters, and the 4 7.7mm machine guns are unlikely to do significant damage on the first pass. Instead, I found it best to immediately yo-yo or otherwise turn onto your target's tail after passing them in order to destroy them through sustained fire. Then I would engage targets in the horizontal plane, because this aircraft doesn't have the top speed to disengage and re-engage at its leisure. The only aircraft which I think is comparable to the Gladiator is the Fiat CR-42, an Italian biplane fighter. The CR-42 has a slight advantage in most respects, but the Gladiator has a much better turn time and should be able to easily get on the tail of a CR-42 that does not choose to disengage. Although the Gladiator only has rifle caliber machine guns, because of its manoeuvrability, it's easily able to stay on the tail of its enemies and inflict sustained damage on them. This is in distinct contrast to the CR-42, which really struggles to keep its guns on target. I found the Gladiator a fun aircraft to fly, but a difficult aircraft to fly well. My stats are unimpressive, with a total of 20 air kills and 4 ground kills and 20 sorties in arcade and realistic. Oddly enough, I did better in realistic than arcade, but I think that was probably me farming kills on the AI. Another thing to note about this aircraft in regard to stats is that you'll get a lot of assists. As I said, it relies on sustained fire to kill enemy aircraft, and you will often get people flying in after you've done a lot of damage to finish them off for you. Which can be a bit annoying, but it's part of the game and just something you're going to have to live with. Well anyway, that is the Gladiator. In many ways a gap between the old biplane fighters and the new monoplane fighters, which is exactly how it feels in game. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.